My name's Guy Adams. I'm a novelist and writer of anything and everything, and occasionally clutter up Blu-ray discs talking about film. But I'm joined today by the wonderful Jasper Sharp. If you could introduce yourself, Jasper.
Oh, hi, I'm Jasper Sharp, an author and critic and occasional filmmaker and disc producer who also clutters up various discs, usually of Japanese cinema.
Well, it's just slightly as a broad thing, but I'm interested to know, what was it about Japanese cinema that properly grabbed you so predominantly? I know you like cinema of all forms, but you are such you are drenched with the knowledge of Japanese cinema. You're quite the expert.
I think it came quite late, actually. Probably when I was in my 20s, back in the 1990s. I was very Catholic with my viewing habits and used to just basically any foreign language cinema I would go and watch, in opposition to sort of Hollywood films. I was never a big fan of that sort of American brand of filmmaking. But with Japan in particular, I mean, I know there were lots of films coming out in the ICA at the time that Tony Raines was programming. And just, it seemed so alien for me at first, but I'd always had this desire to go and live in Japan. So basically, which I did, about 5 years later, I taught in Japan English, and went to Japan to research Japanese cinema for a couple of years in the early 2000s. But for me, it's a difficult question. I guess the thing was that there's so much of it. That you think you've got a handle on Japanese cinema, and it's just such a large industry, churning out about 500, 600 films a year. And one of the oldest film industries in the world. It has a very long history, and obviously these films are primarily made for Japanese audiences. So I think you get a really good insight into the culture, the historical trends, and I don't know, as a sort of self-contained sort of industry that's very distinct from Hollywood, I think. Although I think there are points of connection within, Japanese film and American film and worldwide film as well. It purely exist in its own vacuum.
No, but there is a very specific rhythm, isn't there? There's a very specific atmosphere somehow that.
I think, the great scholar of Japanese cinema sort of encapsulated it very simplistically, but he would say that if Hollywood films were all about plot, European films were all about character, Japanese films are all about atmosphere. And I think that's maybe a very tendentious, maybe simplistic sort of way of looking at things, but I think that's a good way of looking at it. And I do think I just love it's just different ways of telling stories and creating worlds on film, and I think that's what I really dug about Japanese cinema.
And different acting styles, different. As you say, when you talk about cultural stuff from a plotting point of view, different things to push against. Specifically today we're going to talk about Roman porno, and these are films that could not have existed in any other country, because I think the desires they're playing with, the atmosphere that they're playing with, the cinematography they're shooting it all with, none of this could be stirred up together quite anywhere else, I think.
I agree. I mean, I think one of the interesting points is Japan has one of the biggest film industries in the world, I think, in terms of production and in terms of its own market dominance. Like over 50% of the revenues from Japanese box office are from locally produced films. So that makes it very unique. But I mean, you have this industry and studio system which evolved over the course of the past 100 years, which and just the sheer volume of cinemas that seems to accommodate all sorts of storytelling. There's, I mean, I think in terms of, you know, the very existence of something like Roman porno or the pink film genre is less to do with Japanese people being obsessed with sex, shall we say, less due to censorship, but more down to other sort of economic and industrial aspects that, you know, just because there's a sheer volume of films being made, but also the films would have played. All of the studios had their own contracted cinemas. All of the studios had their own sort of type of brands of films that they specialised in. In terms of the pink cinema, this was like almost a sort of punkish opposition to the main industry, in that a lot of the cinemas were independently owned, privately owned, one person operating one venue. And so there was an outlet for these films. You know, they made money, but that's not to say other films weren't making money at the same time.
I know that the specifically Roman porno was created very much trying to chase that money. How much is you say other films were making money? Nikatsu, did they not think so? It feels like they really chased that as a way of keeping the doors open.
Well, I mean, if you look at, say, pink film as something distinct from Roman porno. Pink film is the independent production of films. That started in the early 60s. One of the reasons for it existing was that there were more and more cinemas opening across the country. And a lot of the companies, with their rivalry with each other, they were like really overproducing. And so you were getting someone like Toei started doing double bills in the 50s, then it moved on to triple bills. And all of the other studios had to fight to catch up. And then that whole system sort of came crushing down when they realized that, you know, you got more and more titles being released into the market, chasing the same amount or a declining sort of amount of audiences. So the companies sort of started easing back on production, but you still had the cinemas still were playing triple bills. So they needed stuff to fill up the third part of the triple bills. This is where these sort of opportunistic producers came in. The new pink companies were going, all right, well, we can make films really cheaply. As Goddard said, all you need is a girl and a gun. We can ditch the gun to get have the girl as undressed as censorship standards would allow. And these were the films that audiences were like rushing to see. So that was the influence of the pink cinema throughout the 60s. They were very popular. There was a lot of them. And the major studios all started thinking, well, you know, we can either do this ourselves, or initially they were like buying up pink films to distribute themselves. Nikatsu pretty much went the whole hog in 71. You know, that they were facing a sort of crisis. Their old sort of Nikatsu action movies weren't doing as well as they used to. So it's like, oh no, let's completely switch tack and basically do what the pink film are doing, but with bigger budgets, full color, better looking actresses who could act, and make. I hesitate to call these films porn films, because I think basically with the Nikatsu films they were dealing with adult subject matter, but they were like tackling a lot of other issues, whether it be censorship, positions of power of the state, Japan's own history, and doing it through these narratives in quite a sophisticated fashion. One should also point out that Nikatsu didn't completely switch to Roman porno. I mean, they still had a unit making kids' films, of all things, that were coming out in the 70s. And there were a few other sort of blockbuster historical movies, but that sort of soon petered out, you know, as the decades went on.
So it's studios aping the punks. This is not the first time this is a model.
Yes,
well,
co-opting what, not innovating but refining, shall we say?
So I appreciate I was unhelpfully conflating the two things. This is why you're the expert, and I'm just nodding, going, "I've got some
Yeah,
lovely
I
pink
think we
lines
really
of things
have
on my
to
desk."
say pink films are not, a lot of people make this mistake that say anything that has sex and nudity that was made within this sort of 60s, 70s, 80s period is a pink film. But by definition, pink films were independent production and not the major studio ones. And certainly I know a lot of directors. When I was in Japan, I was lucky enough to meet a lot of the filmmakers, and many were still making films during the early 2000s. And they were very quick to point out this distinction that they were making pink films, which was seen as something aside from the mainstream industry, should we say?
Is that partially what makes them so interesting? It's certainly interesting enough to make one hell of a coffee table bouquet, if I may say.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I am trying to tot up how many strict pink films were made by the strict definition were made over the, 40, 50 years period I cover in Behind the Pink Curtain. Probably around about 5,000. So out of that, how many were interesting? Probably about 50. I don't know. Most of them are pretty much what you'd expect.
Yeah.
But there were certain auteurs in there who used the format to sort of, the idea that, you've got people sitting in a cinema, they've come to watch nudity and sex. And outside of that, you had a general degree of freedom to do what else you wanted. So not all filmmakers exploited that, but some certainly did. And there were certainly people like in the 80s, someone like Hisayasu Sato making films like Lustmord, Boko Honban and The Bedroom and Lolita Vibrator Torture. These were more like horror, like Cronenbergian sort of body horrors and critiques of new media environments. Certainly very bleak, pessimistic works that you really wouldn't think would play to a group of people watching films in a sex cinema. And I will say, like, a lot of these cinemas have all closed down now. So in Behind the Pink Curtain, you could see when I first wrote it 15 years ago, the whole genre was pretty much, where everyone was very bleak and pessimistic because they didn't think it was going to go on much longer. And in reality, it hasn't, because a lot of the cinemas have closed down. So they've had to migrate to sort of new media like video or digital projection. But a lot of the cinemas are closed down because, like I said, they were family-run places. They couldn't afford the costs of equipping to digital projection, and generally a general cleanup of Tokyo as well, which a lot of this I cover in detail in the new afterword for Behind the Pink Curtain. But certainly when I was living in Japan researching the book, early 2000s, you would go into a pink cinema and it would be like really run down, probably hadn't been refurbished since the 60s or 70s. A lot of the same audiences, just old men just taking a break from their old salary men, might be just sitting there skipping off work and sitting there for a couple of hours. You paid 1,200 yen, I think, which is probably about $10, say, and that would give you access to a triple bill of films, or each about an hour in length, that rolled on. So once you got access to the cinema, you could stay and watch them all. You could come in halfway through. It was like the proper sort of old, that sort of exploitation, sort of grindhouse environment.
Yes, I must admit, my brain's also picturing Goodbye Dragon Inn, which is perhaps a slightly dreamier version of.
No, there's pretty other scuzzy activities going on in these cinemas as well. But there were very few people there, and a lot of people might be drinking beer, reading the newspaper. I mean, I do remember going to watch Hisayasu Sato's Lolita Vibrator Torture. It played as a retrospective from 35mm that was just came up in the programs, and I was going, I'd love to see that on the big screen. And it's a pretty shocking film in general, but just seeing
the title like that, is it?
like I say with
my next tattoo, that is.
I say in Behind the Pink Heads, and I say it basically does for the vibrator what Texas Chainsaw Massacre did for the chainsaw. But I mean, just seeing
needed doing. It's about time someone did that.
It's all been done. But yeah, just seeing the indifference with which the audience was sat there, like it was really something to behold. Just people yawning, reading the paper, drinking beer, walking around. You know, it was just very funny.
It's like you say about what these films offer and what these films are for, how they can be viewed in a very simplistic kind of light until you really start digging. And then, yes, you've got an audience of people there that you're describing that are quite apathetic to what's going on around them. But this is a film that is not just designed to be background titillation.
Yeah, I mean, Hisayasu Sato's films in particular deal with a lot of these themes of social alienation and the sort of latent violence underneath Japanese society. But I think that generally the sort of people that go to or went to Pink Cinemas were not drawn by individual titles, individual directors or whatever. They were just going there because they were there, really. But what I think is interesting is that you had this whole sort of critical discourse that was building up outside. There was film critics who would wander in and go, "Oh, hang on, these are really interesting films. These are actually saying things." And then there were attempts by the companies to sort of put them in other venues outside of the main Pink theatres. You know, there was all these initiatives. The Four Devils directors, of which Hisayasu Sato was one of them, and Takahisa Zeze, guys that have gone on to sort of semi-mainstream careers, but they were there going, oh, hang on, we want to get this out to, you know, proper art house viewers who they did their first retrospective at the French Cultural Centre, the Athénée Français, in the early 90s, and eventually started pushing their films onto the international festival market.
You'd be surprised that that as a route is, my brain flitting as it is wont to do. I jumped to Franco. I know we've both talked about Jess Franco before, but the idea that something that on the surface of it is I've just knocked up this brief bit of titillation, and then you end up with something that provides, to quote the great Sean Locke, quite the challenging wank, because you've got such a strange tone, such undercurrents of stuff going on that you know, this isn't what I'm trying to think in terms of how much of this is people that just want to make films and they understand that this isn't a way of making films. I can make films as long as I have some kind of sexual content to it. That is an avenue for me. And how much of it is I want to make films, but I also want that sexual content. I want to be able to discuss that sexual. How often is it truly sort of tangential to the whole thing, do you think?
Well, I think in the traditional studio system, it was really tough to get in. If you wanted to be a director, you generally had to be a graduate from a very prestigious university. You'd have to take an entrance exam to work in the studio, and then spend like 10 years as an assistant director and writing scripts, and then you might be able to get your film debut out there. But I mean, that was never entirely sure. So in terms of like a lot of the Pink film directors were all wannabe filmmakers. A lot of them, say, for example, started making their own 8mm films in the 70s and 80s. I mean, Kiyoshi Kurosawa came into mainstream filmmaking through that route. It was a way of making films and working with film, getting the experience of working on a film set, doing it with a very low budget, very short shooting schedules, and delivering stuff for a specific market, but with the freedom to experiment. I mean, I would say if you look at Kiyoshi Kurosawa's two sort of Pink films, the Bumpkin Soup and the Kandagawa Pervert Wars, I'd say he has zero
Another great
interest
title.
in sexual content at all. More interest in that idea of film form and genre and what you could do, how you would create a world and on film within these means.
Yeah, I mean they entirely fail as examples of
But
cinema.
a better example, I don't know if you've seen the film Departures by Yojiro Takita. He won it was 2009 film, he won the Best Foreign Language Oscar, film about a guy who ends up working as a funeral assistant.
I haven't seen it. I know.
It's very good. But if you look at his early Pink films, I mean, they're like sort of sex comedies, very raunchy, and very tight paced and actually very funny. So you could see that he was honing his craft as a commercial filmmaker, even within this genre. I mean, I think he was someone that delivered what audiences wanted, and he was popular with Pink film patrons, shall we say. He wasn't, doing this sort of really confrontational cinema. And Masayuki Suo, who made Shall We Dance, made a brilliant film called Abnormal Family, which is one of my favourites, actually. It's basically he made a pastiche of the films of Ozu. So you have this sort of typical nuclear family set up with the widowed father and the kids still living at home, and then sort of spun it out into a sex comedy, but everything framed like an Ozu film, using Ozu's dialogue, and it's a very funny film. If you know your
My
Ozu.
brain, I find that I can picture a number of things that would work that you could be shot at knee height. That's doable. I think I can see how. I think Kiyoshi Kurosawa is he's never trying to give the audience what they want. I don't think. I adore him, but I'm not sure. I think he knows what he wants to do, and sometimes the audience enjoy that happening. And I think
I guess
lovely.
this, when you look at this very early on in his career, it's like I guess audiences didn't know what to expect from a guy like Kiyoshi Kurosawa. It's like, what the hell?
Which I think is great, but that's perhaps. I think this is a route where you have to have perhaps an eye on the potential for commerciality, so you can keep doing it. So
I think Kurosawa is one of those people that has got to where he is now just out of sheer bloody mindedness. He wants to make films. He has his own way of making films, but it's taken a while for the rest of the world to catch up with him. So he would go via Pink films into straight to video stuff, then into horror, and basically just charge on regardless of what people, and waited for the critics to really understand what he was doing.
I'm looking at. I've got this brilliant pile of. I'm gonna because I feel so David Letterman that I'm talking to you and I have this stack.
Whoa!
This stack of wonder on my desk. I feel I should be talking like this to the band before. What did I just show you? Like the felines. Well, you're good. I mean, it's the fact that to talk about the sort of diversification of what you can do there. The fact that is made by the same person.
Yes.
It seems shocking to me. They're both great films, but the tone of each of those. Just to explain so it doesn't seem too bizarre, this is the line that you've been producing for 88 films.
That's right. So I went to 88 Films and said, no one's releasing Roman porno films in the UK. You interested in doing a line of them? And so we've done 10. And it's very difficult. I mean, I think with, I said Pink film was there's been about 5,000 made. I think with Roman porno, anywhere between 750 and 800. So trying to find representative titles, classic titles, interesting titles. There's so much to choose from. Like I said, that these were like over double the budget of Pink films, and were made by professional studio directors who'd gone through that 10-year apprenticeship system. So really there was more ambition there. They were told they had to make sort of films with sex and nudity in it, but there was a sort of, Watcher in the Attic, of course, based on the work by Edgar Allan Poe. It has a literary background. It is set in the 1920s. It has very sophisticated ideas about voyeurism and the sort of surveillance culture. A lot of subtlety in these films that I think goes unnoted by a lot of viewers who, if you're going to just watch them as sex films, they're disappointing, maybe perhaps, but there's more to these films than that. I mean, beautifully shot, Watcher in the Attic.
Watcher in the Attic is superb. Again, makes me think of Franco a little bit, but I know for some people that might be damning it. So I should be
cautious. By a taste of his own, isn't he? Really.
But it's beautiful. It's a stunningly shot film, as you say. But the tone and the rhythm of the film, and the power transference and the sort of the politics, if you like, of it. It's very sophisticated. It's a very clever
Night
film.
of the Felines as well, just as a representation of the Shinjuku sort of area of Tokyo, is just like a visual record. I mean, I think that's one of the things they always say about soft porn from the 70s in general, is just the fascinating thing is because looking at the set decor and like the buildings, a lot of stuff shot on the street. But really looking at what that sort of district of Tokyo, what it embodies, it is, if you know Shinjuku, it's been like throughout the 60s, it was scene of student protests and very countercultural sort of art scene that then went into a more commercial arena. And I think something like Night of the Felines, showing the group of girls who work in a Soapland massage parlor, it's looking at that idea of commerce and how materialistic Japan was becoming, and in terms of individual desires and within this context, really.
Yeah, and again, very, very complex in how that's addressed. There is an unusual dynamic between three characters, I'll say, that is not something you'd see from a lot of cinema of that time. It stands out as addressing something particularly complicated and complex and rich.
Yeah, I mean, these were exploitation films, or marketed as exploitation films, but films made by intelligent people that actually who knew that they were making films and wanted to make films with messages. I mean, I would say that in the early years, Roman porno was particularly interesting. It became less and less so as it ended in 1988. So when you get into the mid 80s, it's sort of, oh my God, it lost its novelty. But just this idea that you could tackle these taboo subjects in Japanese culture within and put it into the mainstream, I think was very interesting.
And it done in a very, the word that comes to my head is straight, which is, for anyone that's seen the film, not perhaps the best word to use, but and then you get to the business with the umbrellas, the stylized nature of all that wonderful stuff, the umbrellas. Catching rainwater in this upturn. It's full of beautiful imagery.
Very poetic, yeah.
Do you think, most movements, if that's not too pompous a word to use, tend to descend? The quality does tend to drop off. Do you think that's because the great people had risen through it and moved on to other things and they weren't being replaced? Or do you think it was just that the air was let out of that little bubble?
Yeah, I think there is that case in the, when Roman porno first started, the director of the two films we've been talking about, Nobuo Tanaka, he'd been an assistant director before, so Roman Porno gave him the opportunity to direct. There was a couple of other ones that came along that caught critical notice at the time. Tatsumi Kumashiro, who did Woods Are Wet, being probably the most critically regarded in Japan. I think that they were reacting against, they were doing stuff that was against the cultural grain. Once you, I mean, especially Kumashiro, a lot of his films basically tackled censorship head on, just about the hypocrisy of censorship, the dangers of a state-imposed morality. And you have to remember, in Japan's censorship climates, these Nikatsu were getting in trouble for putting these films out into the mainstream. But the only real sort of when government censorship before that had either been during the war, when it was like the wartime government basically suppressing films with left-wing ideas in it, social dramas, that sort of thing, or during the occupation, in which the censorship was imposed by another country outside of Japan. So, you know, these directors were very aware that censorship is a dangerous thing. So Woods Are Wet is an adaptation of Desaad's Justine, that's set in the context of 1920s Japan, and made in 1970s Japan. And you know, one of the characters even says it, doesn't he? You know, that you can't have a state-imposed morality. Morality is something that should be organic, not imposed from top down.
It's another beautiful film, but it's a harder film. I'm going to zoom a little bit again, but it's the beauty that is on screen, and then the accruing sense of dread, if you like.
It's
that
very
sort of
dark, isn't it? Yeah,
it is dark, you know. And you get to the end of it going, "That was very beautiful. I need to crack open a window in my heart." You know, it's quite the experience. And
you say that probably the most authentic or faithful Desaad adaptation in terms of films. I mean, a lot of it just is surface level skims. We go back to Jess Franco again. He did his version of Justine, which is like a sort of Mills and Boone sort of historical.
You can feel the German influence there. I think we can hear the producers' purse strings. I don't think Jess was ever particularly interested in cruelty. I think he pretended at being interested in cruelty. I think he dances around cruelty, but I'm not sure. Woods Are Wet feels cruel.
Yeah, and again, I think it's, you know, Japan being a sort of very hierarchical, rules based, or certainly the 1920s Japan that's depicted in the film. You know, that idea of like a corrupt sort of upper class people hiding behind their walls and abducting young girls to put them through their paces. I mean, I think it works, you know, just as well in 1920s Japan as it does in Revolutionary era France.
And the weird business with the blocking. So we can't move on without mentioning that. The idea that
I mean, that is almost that is a direct reference to the way that say pre-war censorship would sort of black out words in books that they considered contentious, and it's a very Japanese thing. It's like nothing ever gets cut in Japanese cinema. Not like the BBFC, who will just say you have to remove this scene entirely. You can basically have whatever's in front of the camera as long as it's not illegal. But just whack a block in front of it, and the imagination goes running. What is happening underneath it? I know a lot of people complain about that with Woods Are Wet. It's like, oh, I can't see the tits, but you know, it's that's not really the point of the film. I think that the blocking adds a very dark atmosphere. You are forced to go, what is going on beneath these you know.
I know. I don't know why anyone would complain, because quite clearly, again, for people who haven't seen it, there is stuff being obscured on screen that doesn't need to be obscured. That's the point. You know, it starts Great swathes of black start covering up the world that you're watching. There is a point being made with that. As you say, it is the blackout censorship of letters home from soldiers. It's
yeah, and I think with Desard in particular, this was a case of that particular book was only translated into Japanese in the 60s, and the publisher put it out in Japan and was arrested for, there was a big high-profile trial for obscenity about how can you spread such filth out. So that deciding to film that particular text is really, it confronts this idea of censorship head on.
I think it's worth. We've sort of been doing this, but I quite like the idea of pushing particular titles forward that you think people should pay attention to. As I tell you, we're talking about pink film in general and Roman porno. Two areas of filmmaking that perhaps are underviewed still. It's difficult to. You found it not entirely a simple matter to get these films out into shops. It was an easy sell.
But nothing gives me greater pleasure than walking into FOP and seeing Assault Jack the Ripper on the shelves.
And he deserves it. He bloody deserves it. I'd give him a kick in if I saw him, which is not quite the plot of Assault Jack the Ripper. I'm not going to sort of say which films you're particularly proud of but if you were to give like a general sort of playlist to people of things to sample both pink cinema and Roman porno, what would you suggest?
Well,
it's a bastard of a question, I know, but I'm trying to sort of...
The ones out of that line, I'm very happy with all of them. There's one called Playful White Fingers, which is yet to come out. It's about a story of a young girl who comes up from the sticks and moves to Tokyo and falls in with a gang of pickpockets and basically, gets involved in these crimes. And again, amazing sort of outside sort of guerrilla style shooting of Tokyo in the early 70s. But it's basically treated, it works well as a great female-centric drama, as a crime film. It's a character study. I think there's it's not this idea, you cut out the sex scenes, you've got a decent film there. So I'm very proud of that one. I love Yumino Kusaku's Girl Hell, which is another literary adaptation from the 1930s of an author, Yumino Kusaku, who was very important in Japanese literary history, but has not really been translated. His biggest work is this 1,000-page epic called Dogura Magura, which Radiance actually just released the film version of that. But just that period detail of looking at this sort of forbidden clandestine sex in a girls' school in the 1930s, and this idea of authoritarianism and corruption. You've got the headmaster and the main teachers and the priest, and all coming down to stifle this sort of florid affair. But it's a film that transfers from a high school drama, period drama, into real gothic territory, and then into full-blown psychedelia, I would say, almost at the end. It's really, it's just like Roman porno at its most unfettered. I also am a big fan of Assault Jack the Ripper. I've saw some reviews on Letterboxd, people going, the characterization of this film is paper thin. But I think it follows the beats of a relationship, doesn't it? Basically, it's boy meets girl. They take off on this killing spree and get their kicks together, and then the guy decides he would rather do it by himself, and then she's there going, "Oh, well, don't leave me." But it's just like it follows the beats of a sort of relationship turning sour, but through the eyes of these two ridiculous serial killer characters. I think it's a masterpiece.
I think the idea of looking at that film and going, it's what's not working for me is the characterization.
Yeah.
That feels to me like someone that really wants to write about film but shouldn't. That
Yes.
sounds cruel, but you know what I mean. It's kind of I'm not sure characterization is quite what they mean.
I don't know if you have to have a degree of understanding of the language and culture when you're watching these films, but I think there's always with these films there's so much more going on beneath the surface that maybe some people aren't picking up on.
I so briefly want to talk about. I think that I'll be honest. The thing that put me off pink film, in a general sort of sense, for a while was my perception that it would not be kind to women. If you know what I mean by that, I'm not saying this is an accurate representation. I'm saying it was my concern when you've got a cinema that has the word rape used quite so frequently in titles. Part of me was thinking, that sort of puts me off a bit. I'm not sure it's for me, and so I didn't look at it. And I think it's worth addressing that actually it's not to assume that these sections of cinema are universally not great on women would be incredibly wrong.
There is, I mean, there are quite a few things one could say about this. I mean, I agree that certainly is a very off-putting factor. Maybe, you say there's the word rape in the titles, but, perhaps in the Japanese titles, they might be using the katakana script, ripu, which is a foreign loan word. So it is sort of indirect. It's almost like putting, something a bit more flowery there, like violation or something. I also think you have to bear in mind the times these were made, that this was, I mean, European or American pornography also feature and still does feature a lot of non-consensual sex scenarios. And even, I'm just thinking British cinema. The one that always springs to mind, there's that film called Fright from 1971. Susan George as the babysitter, and they break it. That whole idea of women in peril and women feeling vulnerable in these sort of very male-dominated societies. I think probably for me the most revolutionary thing about Roman porno is that if you consider that a lot of the films, say, not just Nikatsu, but all of the studios were making in the 60s were all male-driven action dramas. All of these Roman porno films are centered around female characters from their perspective. So these are women's stories. So, you might have a rape or, a threatening situation, but you're always seeing it. You're meant to associate and identify with the female character in the best film. I would not say there are films which are slightly more reprehensible, but I think that for a lot of the films it can be offered as a defence. There's more sophistication there than one might first assume.
But my point exactly. That I think it was a lazy assumption that was keeping me back from an area of filmmaking that was not an accurate summation of it. And I'm surprised by the amount of times where I think they're actually rather good on women. As you say, there's a lot of strength to it. There's a lot of it is more nuanced than you'd expect.
Yeah, I mean, a film like Sex Rider, Wet Highway, you have a very strong female character at the centre of that who does get raped at one point, but she is presented as someone who knows what she wants and is very much the heart of the drama.
I mean, Watcher in the Attic, I think, is another perfect example to sort of put forward of something where the woman has a great deal of agency within that story.
Yes.
Even Apartment Wife, arguably. Bless it. This the first.
Yeah, certainly so. I mean, yeah, shining the spotlight on one of those bored housewives that is, is bored and sat at home while her father goes to work and is not feeling any sort of emotional or sexual. I mean, it's like Belle de Jour, isn't it? Basically, that scenario. It's
But again, the assumption that it's going to be. I mean, she has every right to be bored. She is surrounded by idiotic men.
Yes.
And it's surprisingly good on doing that. You think this is a 1970s film? It's called Apartment Wife. I mean, I accept that I'm using English titles here, which is not to sort of try and get an impression of the film just by using its English title is always going to be problematic.
Yeah, Danchi were these new sort of apartment blocks that started being put up en masse in urban centres like Tokyo in the 60s. So it was very much a phenomenon about, you build these high-rise blocks as new environments for people to work in, like council estates or something. How do people live in these? Are these designed to be nice places to live, or are they just purely functional? So definitely, I think that was very much a critique of that sort of new model mode of living that it was presented to the Japanese public. The husband goes out to work, wife sits at home and does wife things, and bakes and meets her friends and raises children. I don't know, but it definitely. I think that film actually came about because it was like through an Oprah Winfrey style TV special that was looking at this phenomenon of interviewing women who moved into prostitution from this sort of boring existence and really looked at it, dramatized this phenomenon.
Yeah, and it's I was pleasingly surprised by how I'm not sure nuanced is the word to use, but intelligent and witty it was as far as the subject is concerned. I'm basically just sort of trying to communicate to people who may have been not watching these films because either they think it's a sex film. I don't want to. If I want to watch a sex film, I want it to last 3 minutes and be free for me online. Sorry to sum up the internet's habits, but that's not. These are not films that are just designed for titillation. These are great films that happen to be about sex or contain sex. That is not a reason to avoid them.
Well, let's in putting one of the ones that I found really interesting to work on was Tokyo Emmanuel, because it was the only one that ever got a release in the UK. I mean, they were making like I don't know, about 60 of these films a year in Japan, and it had been doing it since 1971. And as we say, this was revolutionary in putting women in a erotic film and really expressing their ideas and their desires and all this sort of thing. And so what I find funny is that when Emmanuel came out in Japan in 1975, it was like something like the second or third top grossing film of its year. And all around the world, Emmanuel was like a big cultural moment looking at women's sexual odyssey. But in Japan, it's sort of, why was it such a novelty? Because Roman porno had sort of been doing the same thing already for like 4 years and several hundred films. So why did Nikatsu feel the need to basically do a Japanese sort of carbon copy of Emmanuel?
It seems a particularly hollow endeavour.
But it's a fascinating film looking because, it has its own very interesting distribution history. We were lucky enough to track down the English language dialogue track for that particular film, which is on the disc. So it's the only one with English dubbing, but also looking into the censorship history and the distribution history, which I do in the essay in the booklet. That things that you would understand, there are certain scenes which got cut, but then looking at the censors' records and they're, just the philosophical voiceover from the big sort of groomer figure that Emmanuel sort of meets, or Kyoko meets, she's called, who's there going on about, extolling the virtues of perversion and what is natural sex is not fun and all that sort of stuff. And the censors go, well, we can't have, British BBFC go, we can't have films that extol the virtues of perversion, but then there's a lot of stuff that you think would be a bit more edgy that they did allow through. So it's quite peculiar.
Extolling the virtues of perversion. See, I'd put that on a T-shirt quite gleefully. I don't see what the problem is, but then I'm preaching to the perverted. But I think we've probably done our job to try and convince people that need convincing. Thankfully, there are many who do not. But to poke into these areas that perhaps are new to them or unknown to them.
I would like to just add one thing, is that my book Behind the Pink Curtain is primarily about pink film, and I have a couple of chapters on Roman porno that put it within the context of the pink film. I think there is still a lot of there's still a good book to be written on Roman porno if someone wants to do it. But for me, what always interested me, I mean, I didn't go to Japan with the intention of writing a book about pink cinema. There was a whole load of coincidences which sort of drove me down that path. But one of my earliest film experiences in the Scala cinema in the very late 80s was going to see a double bill of Shohei Mimura's The Ballad of Nariyama with a film called Violated Angels by Koji Wakamatsu, which was like possibly the only pink film that had got a UK release up until that point. And the history behind that is sort of strange as well. But Wakamatsu used these quite pink scenarios and quite violent pink scenarios to address the sort of student politics of the time, the radical left, and they were very much involved in, some might say terrorism. His scriptwriter, Masao Adachi, ended up in the Middle East for a good 20, 30 years. And by some sort of weird coincidence, Wakamatsu's films played a lot of European festivals in the 60s, but he went to Cannes Film Festival with Nagisa Oshima. But the politics and how these films embodied the sort of revolutionary spirit of the 60s was something that really interested me, because I didn't know a lot about sort of the new left, the rise of the new left and the student protest movement in Japan. And pink film was one way of addressing this subject. And so when I moved to Japan, it was roughly the same time as Masao Adachi came back to Japan from a prison in I don't know where it was Syria or Israel or something, but I just became fascinated with this figure of Adachi. I'm lucky enough to meet him as well. He's a fascinating guy, still making films to this very day. Age 85. But generally, I was always aware that there was a thing called pink cinema, and sort of curious about it. What was it exactly? And then just by coincidence, I just ended up bumping into lots of filmmakers who were pink filmmakers when I lived in Tokyo. And the more I talked to them, seeing the cinemas there on the streets, like, are Japan in 2003, are they still showing sex films in cinemas from 35 millimeter and still making these films? All of this stuff really piqued my curiosity, and I figured this is like an undiscovered, an uncharted territory, let's face it, and let's take a look at this in depth. And it's very rare that you get like a nice subject like that presented to you, which can be used to explore so many other things through it.
Yeah. It's, sex can usually be the route that can lead to lots of different things. It's not it's not particularly unusual, I suppose. But it's a phenomenal book, and I can't do my Letterman with it, but I shortly can, because it's been reissued by the lovely Harvey Fenton at Fat Press. When's it out?
Well, I actually, by coincidence, literally spoke to Harvey this morning. So it is going to be out shipping, I think, in mid-August. And there will be a signing at Fright Fest this year. And, for me, it's great that it's come out third edition. When it came out, I had no idea what to expect, because people just didn't tend to write about these kind of films in the 2009. And I'm glad it got a very enthusiastic reception. But it had went into second print and had been out of print for a couple of years, and used copies were like going for silly money online, if they were available at all. So I'm really happy that this is coming out again. I'm really going to be curious to see how, it's 15 years since I wrote it, so that's a whole new generation of cinephiles have come up. So I hope this will lead to people discovering these films as well, a new generation, and looking at them with a broader mind than, say, people would have done 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's a stunning book. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. Which,
thank you very much.
But I think there is an absolute truth in if you follow the history of most countries' sex cinema, that's where you'll find a lot of truth. You'll find a lot of innovation. You'll find a lot of artistry. You'll find a lot of stories, and the idea of avoiding looking into those areas through some sort of sense of prudishness is idiocy. It's a great history. It's a great chunk of cinema history, and it's a great chunk of cinema. So read it, watch it, or Jasper will come around to your house to film Assault Jack the Ripper 2.
With my cake knife.
Yeah. Thank you very much for being brilliantly wise and infectious with your enthusiasms, as always.
Thank you very much for talking to me and your interest.